Hi, it's me again. It's Will. Hello. Great to see you. I'm here. Today I want to talk about journaling. Why do we journal? What's the point in journaling? How do you journal? I don't even know sometimes, but I have some thoughts and ideas I want to share with you all today. So, I think journaling can come about in three ways for me, okay? So, I call way one narrative journaling. So narrative journaling is when you kind of like sit and you like write out a sequence of events. I went to the store and I bought milk, and I felt this way about the milk. Right, discussing the events of the day. Uh, Maybe you talk about how you felt throughout the day, but mainly being focused along a narrative of kind of like this happens and this happens and this happens. There's a sequence to it. Okay, so I guess, in my opinion, like, what's the value of this, right? I feel like sequence journaling or like narrative journaling is really helpful when you want to um, keep just a record of like what happens for you, right? Keep a record of like habits, keep a record of routines, keep a record of like what kind of progress you're making by how your day looks and reflecting on that. I think that's really valuable. Um, But I guess some of the pitfalls that could come for narrative journaling is a couple things, and I don't feel like I hear people talk about this enough, but I feel like there's actually like a pressure to narrative journaling, right? So hear me out. So when we narratively journal, right, there's a couple things we have to like recall and keep in mind. We have to keep the sequence of the events in mind, right? And depending on our own kind of expectation for what that might look like, there can be a pressure in engaging with it, right? So when I think about self-care and I think about journaling a lot in this way, is that if you want to do things for yourself, right, you have to consider like the barrier to entry to doing good things for yourself, right? So I think about, what's the barrier to entry to like narrative journaling, right? I think if you're somebody who does creative stuff, or has some kind of like ego attachment, which I'll discuss more in another video, um, about being a good writer or expressing things clearly, or you're like a good communicator, one of these written rules, right? It can create additional weight when you come to to narratively journal, right? There's a pressure in remembering things. There's a pressure on maybe how good it should or shouldn't be, and I'd encourage you all to reflect on that. It's something I certainly reflect on a lot. Like, are there expectations for me here? Um, but something else I would put down here to consider is, um, do your assumptions about expectations and standards, do they serve you here? Like, often in my experience, they certainly don't. I don't know if you guys are anything like me, but um, my standards for writing sometimes can get in the way of me even initiating things. So this kind of creates like an inertia of sorts. Um, so in my like counteraction to this, I call it kind of brain dumping, another type of journaling, type two, where you literally just like write what's in your head, and like, in my opinion, the focus is like sifting through a lot of the thoughts in your head, a lot of the like, this is exploration journaling. It doesn't have to be concrete, it doesn't have to go anywhere. It has to just be like what your experience is like right now, okay? And in an interesting way, like, this type of like brain dumping for me feels almost very akin to Carl Rogers' kind of person-centered therapy, and like a lot of person-centered theory focuses around like being like in the now, in the present, about the things that are coming up. So like, I call this brain dumping kind of like in the direction of that, right? So we're dumping thoughts out. So like, this could literally look like, I'm gonna read an excerpt from my own journal. I got my own journal right here. I'm gonna read an excerpt. Okay. So um my assumption of how good I am. It hasn't worked previously. I feel strong needs to push through a task that require my ego and also slowness, which music does. I'm feeling embarrassed about not being able to reach my standard of music in my head, right? So I make a lot of music and I have challenges with standards. And then I just wrote, I feel sad now afterwards, right? So I'm not necessarily like focusing on events, sequences of events. I'm focusing on like the brain, my internal environment. So that is a little more narratively focused. But if you'll stay with me here, there are also other journal exits I've done, which I will put on the screen somewhere while I talk. That highlight less structured ways of thinking. You know, you can literally just write, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm confused, I don't know where I'm going, what am I doing here, or I feel optimistic today, I'm excited, I'm looking forward to the future, I'm looking forward to what I get to do today. All stuff like that, right? Just feelings you just dump out, right? So you might be asking, why do this? What's the point in this? I'm just like writing like nonsense out of my head. So something I've kind of noticed is that there's like a lot of, for me, a lot of like brain gunk, okay? When like I get up in the morning, right? I have a lot of maybe these anxieties, a lot of these fears. I don't know if you guys are like that too. But I feel there's a lot of stuff that gets in the way for me with engaging with creative activities, with being as present as I kind of wished I was. So when like I clear out this brain gunk, then I can be a bit more present. I feel a bit lighter is probably the way I would anecdotally describe it. But this might be challenging for you if you're like alexithymic, for example. You struggle to identify your emotions. So, you know, be understanding with yourself about like how effective that might be. Because if you like don't know how you're feeling in your body and you try this out, you might be really confused. You might be like, well, what's going on? I don't know how I feel inside, so like, what's brain dumping going to do? If you can't point at feelings, point at thoughts, okay? Because in my opinion, feelings kind of come first, and feelings often try and describe or rationalize or protect us. Thoughts rationalize and protect us from feelings, okay? So like, start with your thoughts. What are you thinking? If you're thinking nothing, just sit with the nothing, and then eventually a thought will happen, okay? So just like, consider that. Think about that. And I guess the third kind of journaling, because I said there were 3 types to begin with. The third type of journaling, in my opinion, is kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm vlogging. I'm talking about kind of my experiences. So the third type, in my opinion, is actually expressing it in a different way. So a lot of journaling is usually in writing, right? Whereas I think you can record yourself talking like I am right now on your phone if you don't want to share it with other people. But talking out loud, and this is great if you're, if you're dyslexic. I'm dyslexic. I sometimes struggle with writing. So it's really useful, I think, to lean into different mediums and modes of communication to give yourself an outlet to reflect on what you're thinking, right? So that the unanimous kind of focus of all of journaling, in my opinion, is like getting what's in here out, right? That's what we want to do, because that generally allows us to focus on ourselves. Hopefully it will process and reduce the size of the negative emotions, and hopefully it will reinforce the motivations of things we want to focus on. So for me, one of the things I want to focus on is making videos and making music. Those are the 2 main things I want to focus on. Also kind of learning more about the brain, habits, motivation, coaching, therapy. That's stuff I'm interested in. So reinforcing those through journaling is great. So just a few ideas of different types of journals, how to journal. Been a really interesting conversation today. Take care of yourselves, and thank you for listening. I'm Will, and maybe I'll see you in the next one. Good luck. Over and out.